Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Supplier webinar today. We have a great panel with us today. Amy Lientz and Morrow are going to be talking to us about workforce projections. But first, I got to get the legal stuff out of the way. We are recording this session so we can post it to our website later. So by being in the session, that's giving your consent to be recorded. So just wanted to get that out there and get that little legalese out of the way so that we can continue. So with that, I want to welcome our panel this morning. We have Amy Lientz with us, and Amy is the director of our energy supply chain. And she's looking at the future needs to support the growing energy mission that we have here at the lab. And then Hope Morrow is our resident labor economist. And she's been working with Amy to look at the workforce projections that the lab is going to need over the next few years. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over. A couple more housekeeping things. If you have any questions, please drop them in the question tab that's in your control panel there for the webinar, and we will address those at the end of their presentation. So please just drop any questions you have in there, and we will watch for those to come in. So with that, Amy, take it away.
Thanks, Stacy. This is a great opportunity to speak to many of our external suppliers and others that are interested in what we need here at INL in our future to support our growing mission. And so as Stacy mentioned, my role has been in the last 2 years has been leading our supply chain initiative for our energy programs. We're going to speak broader to that today. Hope is very engaged with the entire laboratory, which includes the National Homeland Security side as well. But we launched a supply chain initiative because we saw the amount of growth that's happening, not only with INL, but in our region on the INL site. As many of you know, the Naval Reactors Facility is on the INL site. We also have the cleanup mission. We have NuScale coming to build 6 reactors. So we'll talk a little bit about that, about why workforce projections are so important. Then Hope will dive in and talk about what we see as our top needs at INL, which aren't unsimilar to the needs that we see at the other contractors too on the INL site. And then we're going to end, and we hopefully will hear from many of you, whether it's speaking into, writing your comments into the chat, or making a comment somehow. But we really believe in the partnerships that are important to make sure that we stay ahead of the supply chain needs, especially in workforce. So that's our hour together. So to get started, if we could turn to the first slide here. As I mentioned, we really wanted to understand what is ahead of us in terms of the major projects that we see that require new employees or employees to support those missions. So we mapped out not just INL's activities and major activities, but we partner with our other contractors in an effort, what we call our Nuclear Contractor Consortium. So quarterly, we meet and we talk about our workforce needs, and we talk about these major projects that we have. And we also work with our regional economic development organization, READY, along with the city and the transportation department, to really understand not only what our workforce needs are to support these projects that you see here, but also to support the community needs that come along with a growing workforce. I have to say our education partners are also at the table, and they have been the ones that have had probably the strongest voice, that have said for years now, please tell us what you need. You know, as industries, we have to be very communicative to our education partners to let them know what we need and when we need it. So They too are at the table with us at our nuclear contractor consortium discussions to talk about, okay, guys, this is what we see in the pipeline that we need, and how are we going to get there? So the partnership has been outstanding in working together here in our region. Next slide. So what we have had to tackle right away was getting our projections the best that we could to help communicate that. And having workforce projections, and you will see that for the next 5 years of what INL will need, is a real gift. Not all industries do that, and it's not an easy task. As Stacy introduced Hope, she's a labor economist, and she works across the Idaho National Laboratory along with communicating and connecting with others in the region and in the state. And having a labor economist has been extremely helpful. She's tied in our HR department as well to help develop projections. And how and what we do with the projections is also really, really important. Understanding the demand, as we mentioned, is really helpful to understanding what our talent needs are, so we can come up with a plan of how we're going to meet the demands. It really helps our recruiting efforts, so we aren't sending recruiters all over and just recruiting for everything. We have limited resources too and people, so we want to make sure we're recruiting for the areas of the highest need. It helps with succession planning, so we all understand, okay, we have a set number of retirees coming in, who's going to backfill those folks? So we always are having those communications in terms of succession. Also, just really understanding where we can have internal workforce development opportunities. How can we reskill and retrain our own workforce so they can support the needs of the future? But here's where a lot of our suppliers come in. It's really important that we build subcontractor and supplier and partnerships with our union and trades to really work in partnership to help fill the gaps. Because as you will see, the needs that we have are going to be very similar to the needs that many of our unions and our subcontractor and our suppliers need, not only regionally, but it's also needs on a national level. So forecast and assessing this constantly is important and tying into our business services group. And then also just really updating metrics and understanding how are we doing? Are we moving the needle? So workforce projections, that's our topic of today. So with that, let's dive right into it and have Hope kind of unveil a summary of our workforce projections. And there's a lot of detail that's behind this, but we'll give you the summary information, and then we will be happy to answer some additional questions. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Amy. I hope everyone can hear me okay. So I'll kick it off and we'll start talking workforce projections and labor market data. I always love when they make the labor economists talk in the morning, because as if everybody else already isn't kind of falling asleep, we should really just pack that in there with some data. So I'll try to make it as interesting as possible and keep everybody awake. There's a lot of really interesting information that we'll go over today. Like both Stacy and Amy have mentioned, if you have questions, please drop them in the chat. I'd be happy to answer them. And at the end, I think we'll go through kind of a variety of questions, whether that's from the more strategic standpoint or the methodology itself. So I think it's really, we're at a critical turning point in Eastern Idaho with the nuclear industry and our partners, INL and our subcontractors, because our workforce kind of landscape has changed a lot, not just due to COVID, but over the last 10 years since the recession and kind of moving into what the future of work is, it's becoming more and more critical now to understand what our workforce demands are. Luckily, I have a passion for this work. I've been doing it for a long time. I was a labor economist for the state of Idaho for a number of years, and so I'm intimately familiar with this work and passionate about it. So I'm lucky to be working for the INL and get to do this on a daily basis. So what you're looking at here is really kind of a jam-packed screenshot, shortened summary version of everything that kind of gets packed into what we call workforce projections. So I'm going to run through this relatively quickly. I want you guys to have an understanding of what this is and what it is not, so that when we look at the actual information, it's helpful to you as you move forward in planning, and we can kind of talk about the differences between resources for subcontractors versus large employers, or how we leverage each other in the region and grow our economy kind of as a larger group. So we'll kick it off with methodology. When I look at workforce projections, typically from like the state's perspective, you see a lot of this data come out of groups like the Bureau of Labor Statistics or the Idaho Department of Labor. Those kinds of things is likely what's familiar to you. So I came from that background, so most of my work has always been in the statistical methodology space. It's pretty easy to build up models, use statistical modeling to look at what our historical data has told us, and then attempt to understand what the future will look like. The best part, I think, about working for a specific employer, while we're large, we have about 5,300 employees, we're not so big that we just have to take a sample size of that data and try to extrapolate out what's going on. We can instead look at every minute detail of all of our employees, their demographics, the way that people typically change in and out of jobs, what our demands will be based on budgeting and funding, and then apply statistical methodology to that as well and look at what our future needs will be. So what's really great about this kind of work is that I really feel like it's all encompassing. We're getting as close to reality as we possibly can, kind of showing both sides of the coin here and doing our best to share with our partners what our needs are so that we can be as efficient as possible, both internally and externally. So what you're looking at today are full-time INL employment opportunities through fiscal year 25. The Versatile Test Reactor project, Amy didn't go over details of each of the reactor projects that are coming online, but the Versatile Test Reactor project over the last year has kind of come in and out of funding, and so we've left the projectionary set in there. Things are in flux. The other nice part about this data is that as projects come online, we can adjust things and change our view of what might be going on in the next 5 years. Within this information, we'll talk about a lot of things, but the gist of it is we want to understand what our needs are all the way down to the occupation itself. So just saying INL has engineering needs. Well, if you're close to INL in any capacity, that's pretty intuitive. We want to know in what capacity, how many, what kind of education requirements or experience requirements those folks are going to need to have to get hired onto the lab, what years are really jam-packed with the amount of hiring that's going to need to happen, and then, you know, some of these other things, like where's the funding going to come from, some of the less fun stuff, right? But that's what you're going to look at today. It's kind of an all-encompassing thing. Amy mentioned we focus a lot on our energy mission, but also national and homeland security. And then we have an entire part of the laboratory that works to enable all of our mission work, also very critical in the functionality of the laboratory as a whole. So we'll move forward here. We've been doing this work for over 2 years. We did a pilot in 2019, and then in 2020, we kicked off the very first set of workforce projections for the entire laboratory. So this was published in June of 2021, our very first set of workforce projections. And we're anticipating over 2,500 openings over the next 5 years for Idaho National Laboratory specifically. So I'll mention a couple of things and then talk about how INL is kind of situated in the region a little bit. You'll see that we kind of bump up here in fiscal year 22 and 23, and then we watch a little bit of tapering happen as we get further out in fiscal year 24 and 25. That's completely usual when we're looking at statistical modeling, and quite frankly, if that wasn't how the curve looked, I would have been panicked. So this was a really nice showing of what our model told us kind of right off the bat. 2,500 openings to some people seem like quite a few. It's about 50% of our total workforce right now. And we'll talk a little bit about the difference between new growth openings versus attrition or replacement openings. But we're about 50-50. We are anticipating to grow. The lab has grown quite a bit in the last 5 years, and we're going to anticipate to see similar amounts of growth in the next 5. But also, as most of us are familiar, we have an aging workforce, not just in Eastern Idaho, but in the country. And we're going to see quite a few retirements come our way. And as well as, as work changes, people reconsider what their lives will look like, what their careers will look like. New generations change the way that they stay in jobs or don't. So all those things play a role here. But long story short, as a complete lab, about 2,500 openings. And as we kind of have moved forward through the fiscal year of 2021, we're kind of tracking this along with what our reality is. What's been really cool to watch is about midsummer, we kind of tracked directly next to what the projection set said versus what we're actually hiring, and we were within about 3% of that. So we're doing pretty good on the modeling side. Oftentimes when we talk about workforce projections, one of the first questions I get is, how big is the laboratory going to get? How many seats are we going to need to have? The really cool part about being able to do demand planning in this way is it connects to everything, right? We can look at now projecting business volume from the perspective of workforce need, campus planning from the perspective of workforce need. And if we have this many needs, then what does that mean for our suppliers, our subcontractors, and our regional industry partners? So this is really kind of setting the stage to help us have those conversations and be more intentional about developing those supply chains for our workforce. So what you're looking at now is hopefully going to answer exactly that. The headcount of the overall laboratory right here at the end of fiscal year 21, we're sitting at about 5,300 employees. We just passed the fiscal year changeover. We're just over 5,300 employees, so pretty dang close. You'll see that the slope of the headcount of the laboratory was pretty steep between fiscal year 2018 and 2021. So what that means for those of us who don't speak math all the time, the line on the graphic here on the chart is pretty steep. That shows us we've had a lot of growth over the last 4 or 5 years. I do anticipate, based on the amount of funding support we've had, federal administration support, looking into other fields of energy, diversifying our energy portfolios, and then of course the extremely high needs in the national and homeland security space, that our growth will continue in that fashion. Our slope here for the next following year, so what you're seeing in the green section, is slightly less than what we saw for the last 4. I would say we're probably on the realistic but probably conservative side. What we're going to do moving forward for the laboratory, and hopefully what we're going to help facilitate with the other nuclear industry partners and maybe some other large employers in the region and state, is say, we can do this. We can map out what our needs are. We can talk about where we think we're going to be as an estimate, and then share that amongst ourselves and in these groups so that we can plan and be efficient. And then if this changes, we update this on an annual basis. We make some adjustments. But it's better to have an estimate, a basis of understanding, than none at all, and try to run with anecdotal evidence all the time. Of course, there's going to be a mix of those things, and all of that information is important. But this really gives us a roadmap to plan and be efficient in that process, and help our education partners and our state and local leadership along the way. So by fiscal year 25, the lab headcount growth is looking to breach 6,000 people. About 6,300 in total. I'll be intrigued to see 4 years from now where exactly we sit, and on an annual basis we'll be updating this, so this will likely change here and there a bit. But very exciting stuff for not just INL but the region as a whole, and energy research in total. So really exciting to look at. I mentioned earlier we're going to talk a little bit about the split between these openings. So we're looking at 2,500 rough openings over the next 5 years. Half of those, roughly 54% to be exact, of those openings are looking to be about of our new positions. So these are due to growth, additional funding, expansion of programs, new projects, etc. We know that we looked at that timeline of reactors. Some of those are INL and some of them are not. But we have a lot going on, in other areas too, whether that's biofuels or batteries, other energy portfolios aside from nuclear. Our national and homeland security landscape is expanding rapidly. So we have a lot to look forward to as far as new positions and growth in the laboratory over the next 5 years. The latter half, that replacement portion, about 46% of the openings we're looking at being due to attrition or replacement, that's really kind of where we can do a lot on our end as far as succession planning, internal development, pipeline planning, and that kind of thing right now. We can really get in front of that and be intentional about knowledge transfer of our long-term employees, et cetera. When I jumped into this, we talk a lot. Everybody at work chit-chats a lot, and depending on what your focus area is, you hear a lot of information surrounding that. So because I work in workforce and labor analysis and market research, attrition is one of those things that gets brought up a lot. Are we an employer that people leave all the time? I feel like we're losing people everywhere. They're getting jobs elsewhere. The unemployment rate's so low. So there's a lot of that chatter. So that kind of changes the way that you view what attrition really means. So when I dove into it for INL, I was surprised to see that INL's attrition is actually quite low. We lose anywhere from about 80 to 100 folks a year. And in an employer that's over 5,000 people, that's really kind of a drop in the bucket. That's strictly voluntary. So those are people who just say, I'm going to take a job elsewhere, I'm going to move. They are not retiring, they're not being terminated, they're not transferring within the laboratory. So that was interesting to me to see that we really are an employer that people stick around to work at for a long period of time. So then where are most of these replacements coming from? Retirements. So the bottom right-hand corner, you see this age distribution. This is the laboratory's workforce as of the middle of the summer this year. Everybody that's above the age of 51 right now is eligible to be retired in the next 5 years. It's a very, very large portion of our overall workforce, well over 30%. So, not often do people just say, oh, I hit my retirement number, I'm out. Although many people do, and they should. I often say that. I'm like, if you want to go retire and drink pina coladas on the beach, please do. You worked a lifetime for all of us. Please enjoy your retirement. But many people want to stay on and work. We have some up into the late 70s that just love their work and are doing wonderful things for the nation. But the point is, we're at high risk, right? If we lose roughly 30% of our workforce just due to retirements alone, that's a whole lot of replacements, a whole lot of knowledge transfer that may or may not get done if we're not proactive about that, et cetera. So this really helps us understand where those high risk areas are, all the way down to the individual occupation, so we can plan for that and kind of get ahead of the game, make sure that we are transferring all that knowledge, we are having conversations with those managers, and then expanding those pipelines so that when those folks do retire, the labor pools are broad, we have a lot of folks to choose from, and we can obtain the right workforce that we need to keep the mission going. So I wanted to also talk briefly about the type of work and kind of where a lot of our heavy demand is spread between kind of the occupation families, the work families themselves. I mentioned earlier that we bring this all the way down to the individual occupation. What we're going to show you here today is very high level summary, kind of top 5 jobs in a couple of categories. But I want to talk to this just for a minute because I think that this is really critical as well when we think about broad or kind of grand scheme of things, the way that we develop or invest in programs for Eastern Idaho or regional or statewide universities. This is the kind of stuff that's important when we're looking at where those investments are going and kind of in what concentration. So this is the same data. These are the 2,500 openings that I mentioned earlier, just split between the types of work those folks will be doing. So you can see kind of right off the bat, almost 600 of those openings are going to be engineering specific. That was pretty intuitive. We have a lot of engineers at the National Laboratory. We're going to anticipate to need quite a few more, and we're going to see some folks retire. So about 600 openings seemed fit. But in Little Eastern Idaho and in the state of Idaho, right, 600 engineers is quite a few. I'll also mention in this kind of tone of INL being one employer, many of our subcontractor needs, probably a handful of you on this call, also have needs in engineering. You hire engineers or you're an entire engineering firm. We have regional competition going on, right? There's other national agencies in the state of Utah, for example, that are hiring mass amounts of engineers. We're kind of seeing that happen all over the Rocky Mountain West and the Pacific Northwest. engineers are becoming more and more demand, and we're not unique in that. The second highest one is technicians. We're looking at about 400 openings in the technician space. This one's a little bit specialized, right? Not every region needs hundreds and hundreds of nuclear operators, but we do. We also have some pretty robust pipelines with our regional education partners to produce those folks. But 403 technicians, most of which come from our regional basis and our regional labor pool, is a lot. Our engineers kind of come from all over, some regional, some national, and some international, but most of our technician workers come right from here. So being able to make sure those pipelines are robust, that students in the K-12 system recognize that those are opportunities for them that are great career paths, and they can be very lucrative for them in the long run. That's a big campaign. That's a lot of work as a region to make sure that our future workforce understands that those opportunities are right here at home. A couple of the others that I'll mention, the union trade, this last one right here on the right-hand side, these are our kind of construction and trade specific jobs. We contract a lot of our work, especially for our large projects, out to many of you, but we still hire electricians and plumbers and a variety of other folks that do that kind of work full-time at the laboratory as well. And having roughly 300 openings in those spaces, that then we will have to compete with all of you and some of our other friends and the unions and whomever else to hire on those folks, kind of exacerbates this workforce needs issue in our region. We know that this is not just a regional or even a national problem, quite frankly. The lack of trade skills on a global scale is extremely high right now. Lots of baby boomers have retired that have done these jobs for a long time. We're seeing less and less backfill of younger generations take on these roles. So in the same tune of making sure our regional and statewide workforce understand what the opportunities are in front of them, these kind of trade and construction jobs fall right in line with that. These are wonderful career opportunities for anybody, and making sure that that's communicated with the K-12 system and even people who are potentially underemployed or seeking a new career path. There's a lot going on in this space already, but just kind of continuing that to make sure that our labor pools are as robust as possible. The rest of these, of course, kind of span the gamut. We have our hard science occupations, management, of course, facility services and operations. That really spans all kinds of skill sets, a lot more in that kind of project management and managerial decisive thinking space. Computing and info systems. Just under 300 anticipated openings. As we talked about our National and Homeland Security Directorate growing, it's likely that this is somewhat conservative, that we'll see more and more budgetary opportunities come our way in that space. We'll see cyber, expand even more so than it already has now. And it's likely that number will grow pretty exponentially as well. So this is kind of the landscape that we're working off of and kind of kicking off that mapping to look forward at what our future needs are going to be. So my next 4 slides, and then we'll talk strategy a bit, and I won't hang on these for too long, is really just looking at all the way down to that occupational level, that specific job level, top openings in a couple of categories. So this first one's engineering. What you're looking at here is the top 5 engineering jobs that we're looking to hire for, or with the most amount of opening demand in the next 5 years. And then you have a range there on the right-hand side. So our nuclear research facility engineer occupation, we're gonna be hiring quite a few, anywhere between 150 to 200 of these folks in the next 5 years. That's what for one specific engineering occupation. I will mention that this is a pretty specific title, and that many folks from a variety of engineering backgrounds get hired in to do this work. But a lot of demand for one kind of specific role at the laboratory in an engineering field. And then the latter 4 are pretty intuitive, right? Nuclear, mechanical, chemical, and electrical engineers. We have programs for those at our Idaho universities. We see an influx of folks from kind of all over the world that are getting degrees in these spaces, anywhere from a bachelor's up through a PhD. But on that note, many of our other friends in the nuclear industry and the research space in a variety of other industries are also looking for these people. So, if we need to hire 80 chemical engineers, we're going to be competing kind of across the nation for those folks to bring in the best talent that we possibly can. Here's our technician breakdown. Here's our top 5 openings. I mentioned earlier those kind of nuclear operator folks. We do have a difference between a facility and a reactor operator. You can see that there. Our health physics technicians or RadCon techs, and then other things that kind of filter in like manufacturing and quality and a couple of these others that are more specific and niche, but are really critical to our overall mission and being able to facilitate our research are these technicians. So we can't do the research without them, and we need them to understand and have the skills that they need to have to do this work. And that's no small job for anybody, our education partners or us alike. So trying to plan for this, make sure that we have robust pipelines, and if they're not robust, to be proactive to make sure that they are, is really at the forefront of what we're doing now. Construction and union related occupations, these are INL only. Amy also mentioned, she mentioned our nuclear contractor consortium once or twice in her opening remarks. We're also looking at construction related openings and demand with our other nuclear contractor partners too, so we can kind of get a regional perspective of what construction need for the nuclear industry in East Idaho is. So we're doing that as well. This is specific to INL only, and this kind of goes to, we're a drop in the bucket as far as the large landscape is, or a couple drops probably in the bucket as far as the large landscape is concerned. But this really does, I think, continue to reflect what our other partners will also need. The security police officer one for our other nuclear contractors like Naval Reactor Facility and others, we all kind of need this kind of security. For the rest of the work, our subcontractors and those that take on these large construction projects, laborers, electricians, and equipment operators oftentimes, shift right to the top. Those are high need areas. Those are areas where people come in and out of career paths often and are so high demand that, they're being recruited across the country on a regular basis to go take jobs elsewhere. And we need them to stay here. So, we're working as a region and a state to do our best to keep them here, keep them happy, and have this work be done on behalf of the region and our work here. The last one, I wanted to also, not skip over some of the rest of our occupations and just focus on the 3 we already mentioned. So these are just the top 5 openings and some of those other disciplines that we touched on earlier. You can see on here project management, just general management, software analysis, even administrative assistants. We have very, very high needs across the laboratory. A lot of these focus either in the NNHS or the enablement spaces at the lab, 2 very robust areas at Idaho National Lab. And quite frankly, these are areas that many folks on this call likely are hiring for as well. And then we end up either in this kind of talent competition market, or what we're hoping to do in webinars like these is make sure that we can use each other and kind of work as a group, as a region, to build those pipelines and kind of expand the way that we, oh, sorry, I'm having some issues with my webcam. I think I should be up now. The way that we work as a region together, so that those pipelines are robust for everyone. No one is suffering, no one doesn't have the right skill sets to hire, et cetera. So I think as on that note, we can move forward into really kind of talking about how we develop that pipeline, how we build action plans, and how we think about what our workforce is. I know Amy's going to chime in here in just a second as well, and we can kind of kick off some question and answer. But kind of my last remarks as far as mapping and workforce development are concerned, due to the projection set alone. We think a lot about pipelines, and pipelines are linear, like physically linear. But when we think about workforce, a pipeline is anything but linear. There's so many opportunities for anybody to get into one occupation, and we really need to be broad. We need to be flexible. We need to be innovative. When we finally have a map to what we need, and we're looking at that now, we can really think about all the different ways we can develop programs or internally train or develop partnerships and do that with our subcontractor or contractor friends to expand those opportunities for everyone. And I think that's really the point that we're at now is regionally we need this, not just for INL. And so we're looking at that development and seeing how multifaceted these pipelines really are and developing that in an intentional way. So Amy, I'll turn it back to you so you can share some closing remarks and some thoughts, and then we can do some question and answer.
Hey, thanks, Hope. That was great. I wanted to do a quick interjection there. When you talked about construction, we're already seeing a few questions popping up. Just wanted to make sure people understood that when we work with the Nuclear Contractor Consortium, not only are we looking at these long-term maintenance and operations and construction needs that each of us as employers need on the INL site, but Hope and a team of other talented people from the other contractors are working with the Workforce Development Council to also look at these short-term construction needs. And so we haven't dove into that all that much here and what those are, but it is really helpful, I think, statewide, that this information of what we need short-term as well as what we need on a continual longer-term basis is really important, because those needs tend to be sometimes a little bit different, and it impacts our community in a different way as well. And so thanks for the question. We'll get into that a little bit more too, as far as some other questions and answers are coming up. As you have seen, there's a lot of data here, and what we didn't do is dive down to all of the different layers of the information that's below all of these different workforce categories. But we have it, and this has been incredibly helpful to us internally. We're going to be using, and we are using this information already to help us with our business planning. It helps us understand where we need to focus our interns and our internships so they become part of our succession planning and our pipeline, and that they are getting familiar with INL and the work we do as early as possible. It helps with us to look at diversity and inclusion across the spectrum, and where can we recruit and for all kinds of occupations, and where do we need to recruit and increase our diversity within our population of INL is also important to us. As Hope mentioned, upskilling or uptraining, as well as really getting on-the-job training ready for our own workforce to move into these various jobs that will be pretty hard hit with retirements in the future. So we really are looking at that strategically as well. So the other step to all of this is about partnerships, and that's why we found it to be a really important next step to make sure we offered this discussion to our suppliers and our subcontractors. Because in those areas where you see that we had high need, whether it's technicians, whether it's engineers, even administrative assistants, we often get a lot of support for our subcontractors and our suppliers in those areas. And it's not just done locally. Fortunately, as we've moved into being able to do remote work easier, we've become not experts at it, but we've certainly become more efficient at it, that having support from across the country, not only for our own employees that we can bring on from other locations, but also for our suppliers to be able to provide our support when we need it as well. So looking at this information from a supplier perspective, knowing where we are going to have the highest needs probably helps you with your own business planning to see that this is going to be an area of need for us in terms of subcontracting as well. So I think that data, I hope, will help you in making your own business decisions or starting to think about what you all need to do in terms of recruiting and workforce planning. So with that, I think, Stacy, we can probably turn it over to some questions and answers that folks might have, and Hope and I can jump on here together and hopefully answer those that come up.
Once every meeting, right? Somebody's got to try and talk while they're on mute. That was me. So thank you, Hope and Amy, for presenting that information to us. We do have a few questions that have come in, and so I will ask you, I'll let you know what some of those are and let you address those. The other thing I wanted to mention to the attendees, if you do have a question, go ahead and drop it in the questions panel. And as we work through these, we'll address that as well. So, Amy, I'm gonna give this one to you. I kind of already sent Shane a message on it in the chat, but I'm gonna have you address it as well.
Okay.
As a subcontractor, we're always faced with the challenge of INL hiring our trained personnel, which directly impacts our business. How is the INL managing not poaching employees from their partnering subcontractors?
Of course you would give that one to me.
Might as well just start out with the hard ones, right?
Yeah, exactly. You know, this is, as I understand it, this is a challenge for a lot of businesses in many industry sectors, and particularly when there is a large company in their backyard, and we happen to be that large company in the backyard of Eastern Idaho. So we do post positions, and in our position postings, they're open to everybody, and people do apply, and they apply from a variety of subcontractors and locations. We have in the past put down that we wanted X number of years of experience, and I will say that will continue to do that. And that's where often we see employees applying from subcontractors who have been with the subcontractors for a while, meeting those years of experience. So sometimes they surface to the top as meeting the criteria in which we're hiring. I will say that there's two things that we're really cognizant of doing. One, we need to have a robust supplier and subcontractor community. It doesn't help if we hire everybody from our suppliers. That's not helpful. So holding hands is going to be incredibly important to us. We want to work together where we see that we have regional needs. So engineering, for example, this is a high need, as you saw from our data. This is a high need of our subcontractors and suppliers. And there's capacity in at our universities to take on more students in engineering and get them very interested in engineering. So we want to hold hands with our community and our region to really bring recruiting and awareness of these key positions that we all have, and push students into these programs and encourage them to go into these programs, so we all have an ability to hire more. And this is not just something that we can attack regionally or locally, but we also are partnered with other institutions like NEI, Nuclear Energy Institute, as an example, or the Council of Energy Workforce Development. Our needs are not unlike what the nation is having. So we're learning together how we can recruit better and bring more to the table. And if we see good candidates that may not have been hired at INL, we want to work with our HR group to say, we might not need these people, but we do want to encourage them to consider opportunities of our suppliers. So that's one thing that we're wanting to do, is stronger partnerships and recruiting and awareness, and build a bigger pie that we can all find candidates for. The other thing that we're starting to do, and we have room for improvement here, is that we'd like to see hiring done more with people that are fresh out of training or out of college, that are not always having X number of years of experience. It's incredibly competitive right now. If we only limit it to so much experience, so many years of experience, then we are cutting ourselves short and finding really good opportunities for people to work at INL. So we're broadening the thinking, I guess, of our hiring managers to encourage them to do more internships, to hire folks that they see are a good fit and that might come with less years of experience. So, and Hope, I don't know if you had anything more to add to that question.
No, Amy, I think that you answered it really well. I think the answer is if we can make our labor pools larger, then that creates more opportunity for everyone. The poaching question is hard. I often make a cheeky joke about absorption over poaching, but it's tough. It's tough when there's a little bit of cannibalization within a region or any geographic area, and that's not something that we want to see happen at all. INL is really adamant about making sure our partnerships are strong, and Amy said it as well as anybody, but making sure those labor market pools are huge and making sure that the folks who are going to feed those are getting the education and the connection with the employers that they need to fill those jobs is really the solution for all of us. So we're working adamantly to make that happen.
And Shane happens to be in a very competitive industry, he's in construction. So we all know how competitive that sector is right now as well. So Shane, I hope that helped answer your question. Here's another question. I hope this one's for you. Does the projection include postdocs, temporary jobs, and non-permanent staff?
It does not. These are full-time INL employment opportunities, so specific to FTEs. As far as, and we may get into this in some further questions, there is some discussion about, how do we better utilize some of these other opportunities, whether that's, staff aug, contractors, part-time, just other ways of work, other types of employees to do some of this work and kind of extrapolate out what we can utilize in our workforce. But this projection set is specifically full-time employment.
Okay, thank you. Amy, I'm going to let you take this one. The computing information systems category. Do any of the positions allow for working remotely?
We have seen that happening more and more and more, even in our National Homeland Security group, where there's been a perception out there because we do classified work that we can't have people working remotely. So the good news is there are opportunities for employees, and they'll have to work directly with the hiring manager to determine if that particular position is an opportunity to work remotely or not. So we see more and more of that happening.
And I think that with the situation for the last 18 months, we have experienced that we can be efficient working from home or working remotely. And so I think that that's going to help in that area as we move forward, because we have seen success in working remotely. So I think there'll be more opportunities for that. Let me see, this one's from Brian. All right, so I wanted to read it first so that I didn't stumble on it. Historically, the INL has had unplanned massive layoffs when Congress decides to change funding on a whim. His dad was laid off in '71 as part of a huge layoff group. So does most of these job plans rely on what Congress funds each year? So I don't know which one of you wants to tackle that.
Hope, I think maybe because, I mean, it was quite an extensive process that you went through with projections, and congressional funding is always at play with who we hire and who we don't hire. So maybe a little bit more in terms of how that projection took into account, uncertainty.
So Yes, of course, we're subject to our funders, right? If we don't have funding, we don't do our research, and therefore there aren't jobs. That's just kind of an is. As far as the projection set in particular and the way that we looked at funding, we looked at our historical funding, and that went back to the early 2000s. So we didn't go all the way back past that, but we really wanted to look at the last 2 decades and see how strong the funding has been, regardless of the federal administration, how that administration looked at nuclear research and national homeland security funding in particular, and kind of draw a landscape out of what we're anticipating with this current administration moving forward. So there is a little bit of that, which is anecdotal, quite frankly. But on top of that, when we did this work, we categorized each of the types of work by priority. So what that meant was, if we're anticipating a job opening, so one of the 2,500, is that job opening secure? So is it a priority one? Is the funding already secured? That means we already have it, or it's in contract that it's coming here. We know that opening will happen because it's part of that funding package to do that work, and therefore it's a priority one job opening because we know, as sure as you could possibly be, that will happen. I would say, I think about just under 80% of the total anticipated openings fit in that category. So there's very few of our overall anticipated openings that live in this priority 2 or priority 3 space, where the funding isn't 100% secure as of this moment. And that's partially due to the fact that we're 5 years out, right? So some of that funding lives in flux. Some of that funding lives in Congress's hands. So those things are things we can't control, of course, but we did think really intently about that, and to make sure that we are erring on the side of reality instead of optimism, because we do know that happens. We do know we don't have full control over what our funding looks like. And so when we talked about those slopes and our growth for our head count, you saw that slope from 18 to 20 was probably quite a bit steeper than what we're looking at moving forward. I wanted to make sure we were being slightly more conservative in the event that funding changed course even just a little bit. So that has happened in the past, and of course we don't want to see that happen ever again. I made an earlier comment about also adjusting a little bit. So maybe all those openings aren't going to specifically be full-time INL employees, but maybe we're going to look at contracts, project hire, staff augmentation a little bit as well. So if that's a way that INL leadership chooses to take it, then that's the lead that we'll follow.
Yeah, so this question kind of, I'm gonna take this one. Ladies, I'll do this one. Does INL plan to do staff aug, BOA, a basic ordering agreement procurement similar to what Oak Ridge is currently doing? At this point in time, we don't have a set plan forward for how we're gonna do staff augmentation. We're doing an internal review right now, and there will be an assessment done by our auditing group in FY22 that will hopefully help us figure out how we're going to do staff augmentation in the future. So I would just say keep checking in on that one. We don't really know where we're going yet with our staff augmentation needs. As Hope mentioned, though, the reality of it is we're not going to be able to fill all of our needs with direct hired employees. She showed you the numbers for direct hire, but there's always going to be that additional work outside of the direct hires that's going to have to be filled by the subcontracting community. And so that's why we're sharing this information, is because where our needs go, the needs for external support trend behind that, right behind it. So it gives you an idea of where we're focused on direct hires, but it should also give you a really good idea of where you should plan for your business to follow along behind us if you really want to be a supplier to the INL and help support that mission accomplishment. So I think it's just good information. You can see where we're going, and then that should help drive your vision for your company. This question is, what percentage of new employees do you envision as contractors? Hope, do you have an answer for that one? I think that kind of probably goes along with what I just answered.
I would say so, Stacey.
We'll go along with that one's kind of been answered. Dean, if you need more questions on that, please just reach out to me. David says, I'm with a contracting group that works with the government entities in project management, process improvement, and IT. What other steps do we need to do besides having an active profile in the system for awards management and being in the INL vendor portal? So Dave, one of the things, I'll take this one too, ladies. One of the things that I always encourage folks to do, suppliers to do, is the steps that you mentioned there are process steps. Having an active profile in the system for awards management and being in the vendor portal. Those are process steps. Those are check boxes that have to be done. What's really important is to spend some time on our webpage, looking through there, looking what we do within the different mission areas, and identify those specific areas within our mission groups where your company really fits. You know how your company fits within those specific areas. So you talk the talk, you have the same vernacular that our researchers do, right? And then it's really important to reach out through the professional organizations and tap into that technical staff, those researchers that we have here, to where you can engage in a relationship with them, get a better understanding of what their specific needs are and how your company can maybe help fill the gaps in what we're looking for in that area. I can try and connect you to the right technical person internally, but I don't speak your language. I mean, we have 5,300 employees. Everybody says something a little bit different in their job. I can't know all of that stuff. My brain capacity just isn't that good anymore. But I can certainly help try and connect you. But it's also incumbent on you as a supplier to do your research and figure out where you fit within our mission space, and then engage with the folks within that area. Amy, do you have something to add?
Yeah, thank you. I think you covered it, but a couple things that I think are good places to find information about INL's needs that maybe others don't think about so much. Make sure to connect into our press releases and our social media sites. We make announcements all the time about contracts that we were awarded or about grant opportunities. I think that's a really important place to look to understand the latest and greatest about some of our project needs. Often there's names that are associated with in those press releases that kind of give evidence of who the program manager might be. But that's a place to connect to. Also, the partnerships amongst our suppliers are so important. We're really proud of the supplier base that we have in Eastern Idaho. We have fantastic suppliers in manufacturing and in engineering and other services that are small businesses. And we have a lot of interest and need to go to small businesses when we subcontract. Stacy does that really well. But get to know those suppliers as well, and the partnerships with among them are really equally as important. So there's lots of opportunities to also get more webinars like Stacy has. We have all kinds of webinars with NRIC, the Nuclear Reactor Innovation Center, with GAIN, the Gateway to Accelerated Innovation in Nuclear. Take the time to spend on participating in those, because those are really opportunities to get to know what we're doing and who's doing them. So.
Yep, thank you, Amy. So, Dean, you have to point out my biggest failure in my job. He wants to know when the current procurement opportunities page is going to be updated. And I'm going to say what I've said for the last 4 years. Please be patient with me. We're trying to get the programs to engage in posting opportunities out there. It's a work in progress. And I know I say that, I've been saying that for 4 years, but I really am trying. I really am trying to get information out there. So don't check it every day, because there's nothing new out there, but maybe check it once a month, once every 3 months. You kind of know how often it gets updated. So, and then Phil, Phil wants to know, his company builds and sells trucks and related products, and he wants to know if we have if we purchase our own. Phil, we do get our vehicles and our buses from the General Services Administration. We have to get them from GSA, but we do have other things that we buy in this area. So I would just ask you to send me an email at stacy.francis@inl.gov, and I can kind of explain a little bit of what the needs are potentially in that area. So with the answer to that question, that takes us right up to 10 o'clock. And that means we are done once again with the supplier engagement webinar. We will be posting the HOPE's presentation and the video just as soon as we get it rendered to our procurement.inl.gov webpage underneath the webinar link. So look for that later this afternoon, tomorrow, depending on how soon we get that video rendered. And then again, as always, if you have a topic that you would like us to cover in this webinar series, just send me an email and we'll see if we can't get it on the schedule. I don't have another one scheduled for right now, but again, you can always look back to that procurement.inl.gov page under webinars and see if we have something scheduled. So with that, Hope and Amy, thank you very much for joining us today. And to everyone who attended, thank you.
Thanks, everyone.